Northwest Liberty News, picking the lock on the shackles of tyranny.
Oh Polly, it's for your sake alone. I left my dear old father, my country and my home. I left my dear old mother to weep and to mourn. I am a rebel soldier and far from my home.
Our movement is about replacing a failed and corrupt political establishment with a new government controlled by you, the American people.
Is America better off than it was 4 years ago?
The Washington establishment and the financial and media corporations that fund it exist for only one reason: to protect and enrich itself.
I am not frightened by what lies ahead, and I don't believe the American people are frightened by what lies ahead. We can meet our destiny to build a land here that will be for all mankind a shining city on a hill.
And now, coming to you live from Kalispell, Montana, only on Red State Talk Radio, it's Northwest Liberty News with your host.
Okay, that dumped out a little bit early for some odd reason. I am your host, James White from Northwest Liberty News. Thanks so much for joining me today. Here it is, the 8th day of March. Okay, so it looks like we're having problems like we had before here with this. Looks like we're having problems like we had before with this software. So what we're going to do here is we're just going to have to wing it. There's going to be no breaks apparently here because this particular software that I'm using for the show has, this is the second time this has glitched out, and I apologize for that. So what we're going to do is we're just going to roll all the way through. We're going to roll with it. We're going to bring our guests on here shortly, and we're just going to go through to the end of the show. That's all we can really do. So I'll have to call Scott up here and get this taken care of. Anyway, I have on the show with me today, this Friday, we're going to be dealing with an issue that is not going to be it's not going to be a pleasant show. It's a necessary show. It's a topic that has to be addressed, and I have addressed it somewhat on my YouTube channel. Excuse me. And we have addressed it here last time that I had Candace Whitelight, who's my undercover investigator, who's on with me again today. But we're going to talk about the trafficking, the human trafficking, and specifically the sex trafficking industry and how it relates to satanic ritualistic abuse. Again, not a pleasant topic, folks, but it's something that if we keep it quiet, then it's never going to be the issue's never going to be addressed, and the problem's never going to be solved. So that's one of the things that we're going to do here on this program, amongst the many others, is try to get this situation with the human trafficking at least illuminated. We want to get it illuminated, and we want to get it stopped. So on that note, I have two special guests with me today. My first guest is Laura Eisenhower. She's a global alchemist, a cosmic mythologist, and an intuitive astrologist, and is an internationally acclaimed speaker. Laura is the great-granddaughter of President Dwight David Eisenhower. She's a leading researcher on health, exopolitics, alchemy, metaphysics, and galactic history. Laura works to free us from the 3D holographic time loop and false or chronic systems. And also, as I said, I have Candace Whitelight, who's been on the broadcast before, who is my undercover investigator, who is on one of the local reservations working undercover. And we're going to bring both of them on the air with us right now. Candace and Laura, are you there with us on the broadcast?
Yes, I am. Hello.
Hello. Candace, are you there?
I'm here.
Excellent.
Hi, Laura.
Great.
Hi, Candace.
Great. Sorry about that. Sorry. Great to have both you ladies on. Sorry about that. That sound mix-up earlier. There's a piece of software here that runs what we have going on, and it glitched out at the beginning of the week, and it got repaired, and apparently it wasn't supposed to happen again, but it did at the beginning of this show. So we'll punt and it'll be fine. We'll work everything out fine. So first of all, I want to thank both of you for being here with me on the broadcast. Before we get going, I want to, because of the nature of what we're going to be talking about, I would like to have Candace kick this off first. And Candace, because of the situation that you're in when in reporting this, and also with the victims, there could be some potential danger to them, and then we never ever want to put anyone in a position of harm, of course. So, Candace, I'm going to have you, if you can, a recap for those that may be new to the broadcast here or not familiar with the topic. I'd like you to recap what we've already talked about and what you've briefly discovered, and we're going to let you set the parameters of the discussion, because again, we don't want to we both have information, of course, that we don't want to be put out there that's going it's going to be harmful to anybody. So with that in mind, Candace, I'll turn it over to you, and if you can just recap, as I said, what we've discovered so far, and everything you feel comfortable talking about, your contacts and the people that you've met.
Yeah, it's quite a many-level situation. I got involved with this, obviously, from the beginning with voter fraud, and that's a funny way to come at the problem. But basically, we have some difficulties on the reservations with corruption, and this, of course, led me to a connection between why the certain political parties have gone after the vote of the Native Americans and how they represent them and what it is that they're protecting, because there's some clear connections between what the natives are interested in, which is basically the protection of their children and their women who have been missing at a very high rate, much above what the rate of people that have been missing from Montana, to a tune of like 40% off the reservation that are, involved in this. And it is many levels of crime. And it is unfortunately the truth that that through my contacts I have discovered that some of these people have been taken out of Montana and then put into a different type of level of program. And that's why I was really interested in having Laura with us today to talk about this, because these are connections that she is more familiar with than myself. And I can say the setup for this is that I had interviews with women that were a part of the Salish tribe on the coast, and that they were dumped off here, which is a reservation, and it is controlled by the federal government. So she is a part of actually several women that have shown up back here after being in this process that goes on at the coast. So that is, my question to Laura, and I would like to involve her in the conversation right away, is that I sent her some information about that, and that if she had any experience with any of the women that she has talked to or counseled that have been involved in these trafficking programs here in Montana or in Washington or Oregon.
I believe I did have a client in Washington that was talking about things going on in Seattle. But the thing is, this is like everywhere. It's worldwide. And a lot of the people that I've talked to have either experienced this through their families giving them up and their families being compliant, or just being, kind of dragged into it in other ways. And so when we look at the larger network, we have to, look at the uncomfortable things like, blackmail and mind control and things that, push others to make such decisions, even, their own loved ones. So we're not really talking about people that are in their right minds or even thinking from a perspective that is anything that's relatable. And that's why it's so difficult to swallow. And so it kind of leads into many layers that are needing to be recognized, because this happens within families as well, where they will give their kids up for these reasons.
Laura, before we go into that any a little bit further, let's as far as a background to give the folks out there that may not be too familiar with your work, give a little bit, if you can, a background on your work. 'Cause I know you have, Candace mentioned it, women that you've counseled and people that that you have come in contact with that have been victims. Can you give us a little bit of background on, the depth of that? And I mean, you've probably seen some pretty. I imagine if you've counseled the victims of ritualistic abuse, I'm sure it's the trauma. The word trauma probably just doesn't even begin to describe it.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, there's so many layers and factors, and I've run into just about it. It almost feels like, every type of story, and then one begins to connect dots and just see, like, the different branches of it, the different levels of it, the different type of experiences. So basically, I've been doing readings for about 10, 15 years. I'm an astrologer, but because I'm a public speaker and I tackle some of these issues and bringing light to a lot of these issues, I draw a lot of people that want to work with me because they know that I'll take them seriously. So everything from going to an event and, working maybe with somebody who is becoming more public, to encouraging people to, have a voice, or at least have a safe place to share their stories with me. I mean, some have even been encouraged to write books. Like, I'll run into them later there and they say, thank you so much, because you inspired me to, write my story and write about it. And so there's just so many different levels of it, because I have an international clientele. And then a lot of the whistleblowers that I've come to know and research, I've been in contact with too. So there's the ones that I've worked with as clients in my day job, and then there's the larger sort of picture of all the different events I go to that are geared around disclosure on every level, really. I mean, I do everything from events that relate to consciousness to ufology to, some of these darker elements. I did a conference for a number of years in Philadelphia called Free Your Mind Conference, and was at that event with Kathy O'Brien, who wrote a book called Transformation of America. And so, it's that level of exposure, not just clients, which there's been, a number of them, but they're very afraid of revealing names, and they just really want to share. So I don't get, like, the details, because I don't want to be pushy with anybody. But, they're very similar stories to the people that are speaking out that connect it with this, shadow element to the power structures that exist in our world.
I read that book, Transformation of America by Kathy O'Brien, a few years back, and blown away by that. I'll tell you one thing, that is, folks, if you really want to know what really goes on, and it's not a pretty picture whatsoever, to say the least, you need to pick up that book by Kathy O'Brien called Transformation. I think it's TRANS -formation, I think is how it's titled, but you can find that, I'm sure, on any of your favorite booksellers. But yeah, that is, that's the thing that, ladies, the thing that is so disturbing is the breadth and the depth of this trafficking. I mean, it's we talked a little bit before, and we'll get into we can talk about Q Anon here in certainly, well, anytime we'd like, but we can get into that in greater depth a little later. But if you just read some of the Q Anon posts, anybody out there that is a fan, if you believe what you're reading, and I happen to, there's people that are gonna be exposed, ladies, that are household names, people that we, I guess some people would say, they're people worship, or people put posters of them on their wall, or try to emulate them. I mean, that type of popularity, they're going to be, those kind of people are going to be outed. Any thoughts on that, Laura? That's what I'm thinking. Are you thinking the same thing, that there's going to be some really probably famous people, household names, that are going to be outed when all this trafficking and all this NXIVM and everything that goes on with that?
Yes, and I happen to have lists of names that I've collected over the course of, I don't know, a year or two, of what all the whistleblowers have shared, some of the things that, might get lost to some people. They might have heard it, that news might have been suppressed. It certainly isn't in the mainstream news. And a lot of this stuff is sort of not taken very seriously, but when one sees a documentary like Leaving Neverland, Netherlands, which is the documentary about Michael Jackson. I believe that's the exact name of it. And it just came out. We're literally talking the first week of March, just came out. It's a 4-hour documentary. And I mean, talk about somebody who's been on most people's walls. I think I had a Michael Jackson poster myself growing up. Yeah. And it's 2 accusers that are basically really, really spelling it out to such detail that's, you know, if people watch that, that's a warm-up to what's to come in a lot of ways of these type of stories. We're dealing with, you know, Hollywood celebrity. We're dealing with politicians. And as shocking as it is, it's really time to take our power back and realize that a lot of the reason behind this level of corruption is to put these people in these influential leadership positions in order to control the narrative, because what we tend to emulate or look up to is a way that we sort of change our behavior accordingly because it seems cool or it's popular or it's trendy or it's, you know, there's subliminals, you know, there's lyrics that we pick up on, there's things in movies we pick up on. So you've got those that are operating from the background using these pawns and people in front of us that seem glamorous, talented, and like they're interesting and they live the life and you know, people, you know, look up to them, but they really use them to control the narrative through things like trauma and mind control, because a lot of them are actually victims to this sort of thing. So it's a multi-generational thing on a lot of levels, and then you're dealing with also the trafficking aspect and the victims that are just, you know, being taken, you know, especially when we were thinking about like the border states and a lot going on with, you know, some of that and the pipeline into California that they're attempting to stop. So it's just so multifaceted. And so really we're dealing with not real politics anymore. It's basically like deep state and truthers and people who really want our country back and liberation throughout the whole of this world, so that we can, you know, put the criminals where they belong. And as scary as it is to, you know, process and deal with, we have to also look at it as an opportunity to really discover what has been kept from us this whole time, because there's something that we're not supposed to know about what we're made of and what we're capable of doing. That is why this artificial matrix that is using and siphoning energy is operating in such a large capacity.
You know, it's not, you know, what you say has such a ring of truth to it. You know, I wonder, you know, how other human beings can treat other human beings so evil and so wickedly. And you know, it's just, anyway, I don't know. I'm going off on a tangent here, but it disturbs.
Well,
it's disturbing. Go ahead.
Yeah, I want to go ahead and take that thought because this is really the tie-in to Montana, and this is an important factor to consider. Our native tribes have been abused for 200 years, so these are things that are built into them, and they have been used by these powers that are, you know, basically think that they control everything. It's about power and control. And it's also about money. And this is how they lure these people in a lot of times, because they do have familial culture here that is very strong. But they are contacted online, they're contacted in person, and they're taken out of what is familiar to them with the lure of something quote-unquote better. And a lot of times the women that are stolen are actually not well treated in the family unit. And this is a very difficult part of the problem, is where you get a dynamic of a woman that has already been pre-abused, if you will, that then fits into this category of being able to be taken over to the coast perhaps and put into a breeder program where they're used for producing more children, and then they don't have birth certificates and they're taken into the pipeline for product that then is used all over the world. And we aren't the only place that does this. Obviously, Laura knows about how the network is extensive throughout Australia and into even China. And so we are just a little cog in this wheel, but on a local basis, we really need to protect ourselves from this. And And it's good to see that active, part of our president and of Q, that are informing people of these truths, and that how we can actually work with this on a person-to-person basis to support our Native Americans, which are very important to us here in Montana, and their efforts to come up with a tribal authority that actually is functional. But we do have a lot of things that are going wrong at this point, and one of them is that the tribes are quite suspicious of people coming on to their land, and it's literally been the tribal police that have on occasion booted off the FBI and the people that are set to investigate, these missing women. So, as far as our governance, there has to be somebody that takes charge of this and just says, enough is enough. I don't want to see this happening anymore. And we do have a gathering of the tribes here. They're actually attempting to come together, and they have a work group called the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, and they are actively meeting. And this is a place where people could actually get involved. This is a group out of Ontario, Canada, because they have just as big a problem in Canada as we do here. And to really shore up our police knowledge, the sheriffs, and get on the same page. And I have found that what really is the irony of this is that we've got people that don't want this revealed, and they're actively having legislation. They're actively out there defeating all of the local efforts to basically bring this up to light. And again, I wanted to involve Laura because I wondered if she has seen this elsewhere. Maybe it's just for a limited amount of time, but according to my research, this is something that we really have to look at as being able to cut through and to inform everybody and know who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. So have you had that in your experience, Laura?
Oh, well, just, yeah, that need for discernment. And, the thing is, it becomes a battle, a political battle that's basically who's smearing who, that the biggest priority is sort of shoved to the side because it seems like a war between just parties instead of looking at the criminal activity, because it happens on both sides. I mean, it's very clear that as far as the Democratic side goes, it definitely seems to be the more, infiltrated at this time. But we have to, recognize that everything is owned by something much larger. When we look at like the pyramid factor and, when we look at what makes up the cabal and what are the origins of that, and the history is just so vast and so unbelievable, and how it set up like world events and how it needs to utilize child trafficking as a form of currency and a form of, a way to keep that power structure going. And the blackmail and manipulation that can take place, puts a lot of people in fear. So it's so abnormal for anybody to want to do evil, but when you've been blackmailed, maybe drugged, to put yourself in a compromised situation, that if you were to expose this stuff, you're going to be, smeared and at a loss and the scapegoat for the public humiliation aspect of it. And while the rest still operates behind the scenes, able to sort of pull this off. So, I mean, we need to help those people too that feel victimized by that level of control and really start to feel into who's who. And sometimes, it's obvious, sometimes it's not so obvious. But we have to, be excited about the fact that things like Operation Backyard Brawl is something, and Operation Underground Railroad is also something that is geared towards going after all of this. And I feel like a huge domino effect is happening with Trump and the Q factor, really getting to the root of it so that the tentacles, begin to atrophy and die away. So when we deal with this on a local level, which I want to assist in doing, everybody who can take a stand in their local community is also going to be a part of sending that ripple out to the very core that's being addressed right now in the political sphere when it comes to the wall, when it comes to these things that people are still battling about because they don't want to see the other factors that are at play, not just the things we hear on the surface. So these leaks, are very important. And, there's indictments and there are scapegoats, but they're still involved. But if they can begin to link and be that domino effect to the people standing behind them, there's no stopping this. I mean, it's really igniting. And of course, once a person gets over the horrors and then you acknowledge the reality, then, most people, really aren't going to sleep well at night until they might find a piece that they can take on in order to put an end to it.
Laura,
even if it's not a huge, still something, right?
Right. And I think what you were talking about before was, I think they call it brownstoning, where, for example, someone may go to a party and they're slipped a Mickey or whatever, and then they're passed out. And while they're passed out, of course, they have someone underage come in, they take various photos, compromising photos or other things. And then, like you said, they're blackmailed. I want to talk, if I can, though. I want to switch gears to something that, the genesis behind a lot of this stuff here, and it's an uncomfortable topic, but it really is. I know something that you are familiar with is satanic ritualistic abuse, and I mean, just how much, Laura, if you had to take a guess, there's a lot of child trafficking rings, if you will, across the country and the world. What percentage of these rings are beholden, or the children end up, involved in this satanic, ritualistic abuse? How widespread of a problem is this based upon your research?
It's a hugely widespread problem. I would say it's up there at the tippy top. I mean, there's child trafficking, teenage porn, child pornography. This country happens to be the worst out of any country in the United States as far as the amount of that exists. I mean, the whole European Parliament, I mean, they're pretty much all supposedly incredibly compromised. And it's hard to say some of these words because of the shock factor I know people experience. But, the main structure of government and what operates beneath it that are controlling, the ones that might be even, benevolent or wanting to put a stop to it. I mean, they hold, this level of control. And it's through these particular ritualistic activities at certain dates and certain times, and what they're attempting to do, and like this whole ball worship that goes way back has always been about, for power, riches, and fame, this is what needs to be done. But it's multi-generational in these certain family lines that have branched all over the world, and so most of it is connected to child sacrifice, ritual abuse, pedophilia. And so one is like the trauma part and just the sordid behavior, and the other one is the actual ritualistic part of it, which is another factor to it. So you got ring upon ring upon ring, but when you think about it, they're like circles all connecting to the one foundation that has to do with Satanism. I mean, 800,000 children go missing per year all around the U.S. alone. And yeah, I mean, what's shocking is, policemen. Some policemen are involved with these rituals. So when you ask me, well, who's attending them? We're talking top people of what we consider to be successful people in society. Not all of them are like that. And the thing is, the percentage is really, really small, but the operations are all kind of geared towards this particular aspect, the satanic ritual abuse aspect. And everything else is almost being held hostage in fear, unable to do much about it. And then you have the ones that are the corrupt that have made an agreement to be a part of this thing, that are holding hostage the people in their field, like the FBI or the police force. And so, yeah, we got to really help the real evils to come to the surface so that everybody else can be clear of it, so that we can build a bigger army of light and a greater team. I would say that it's a huge percentage. Most of it, if not, it all kind of links to it, or a money-making part of it to fund.
That's what I was going to say. That's what I was going to say. Is there's got to be a money-making aspect to this. Candace, you've done a lot of great work and filed great reports about the stuff that you've done there locally here on this reservation. What would be your sense of the motivation of what you're uncovering there? Do you think that is just a pure money thing, or do you find that there's some sort of a darker element involved in that case there on the reservations? I know you don't. I'm not asking you to, of course, to give any type of an expert testimony. I'm certainly just asking for your opinion, of course.
Well, yeah, I have talked around, and the folks that I have talked to have basically, in unanimous opinion, said that there's a real schism between the tribal council and the police forces, as opposed to the people that live in the single wides down on the prairie. I mean, there's a wide gap there. And this is common all over the country, really, is that there is huge money-making facilities on many reservations, the casinos, and they have a clear path to launder money that they get from all sorts of different endeavors. And this particular subject of the blood product and the organ product, it segues real quickly with what Planned Parenthood has done, and they've captured actual transferring of money and contracts for aborted babies. I mean, it is all kind of in the same kettle of fish, where if there's money to be made, they're going to do it. And there's a history of this in the tribes that goes back quite a ways, of slavery and of using women amongst tribal members, and then of course with the rise of the current state of affairs, they've got a high need for this adrenochrome, which is manufactured in various laboratories, and this has become a very high-priced item that, of course, they consider that as being part of what their just dues are for just being in existence. They get, money is one of those things that nobody can ever have enough of. And if you've got a product to sell and you can sell it to the highest bidder, it's hard to say no. And that's, I believe, what has driven a lot of this. So.
Let's talk if we can a little bit about QAnon, because that is something that, it gives me some modicum of hope, because I see the zero deltas. I see where, QAnon's dropping now just about the same time, I think, almost, zero delta for President Trump. I think Q plus is President Trump. I think that has been confirmed here a couple of weeks ago. But, ladies, I've done videos on Q, and I've gotten a variety of responses. I'm an idiot, great job, ridicule, all down the line. And that's what you do when you create a video or whatever, you expect that stuff. But I'm going to ask you first, Laura, give us, what is your thought on the QAnon phenomenon? I mean, are we looking at the greatest military operation against the cabal ever perpetrated in the history of the planet, or are we all going to get duped in the long run?
I really can't imagine that we'd all get duped, because there's other ways to dupe us. I mean, humanity's been half asleep, being duped by movies and social engineering and propaganda and all sorts of stuff. Why would we be duped in something that is already very clear? I mean, when you work with enough victims, when you've met enough whistleblowers, when you've done the research, everything that's coming out is not a huge surprise. And I think this has been in the works for a while. I mean, there's this whole JFK Jr. factor, too, and his friendship with Trump, and things that might have been set in place for this to come forward, and something that has been worked on for a while to get us into this position. I think it's good to be skeptical, and I've, I held it at arm's length at first. But then when you see what these drops have to say, when you see how connected it is with events that are sort of currently surrounding us, and you see the things that have been exposed in connection to, things going on in Tucson with, camps, and then you see the things that have been funding those camps, or like the CEMEX cement company that is affiliated with the Rothschilds and McCain and the Clinton Foundation, and things with Haiti and all these different things. It's like when we put our own dots together, the Q drops are not very different. And some are surprising, but for the most part, it's like, yep. he's saying it like it is. So, or, you know, it's all coming out. So it's not like, for some it's shocking and it's easy to dismiss it, but for some of us that have been researching this for years, it's very much in alignment with things that have already been cleared, down to even more details that, you know, people can back up. You know, particularly this camp in Tucson that was, you know, raided, and some of the Q drops, you know, surrounding that, with the wall being built, and, you know, the intention behind it when it comes to, you know, trafficking and this and that. And then, you know, when you see the affiliations with people like McCain and Clinton and how it connects with, you know, even things like John of God, which is also linked to child trafficking, you start to see this larger network connected to these organizations. And even McCain's, I think it was his campaign manager, he was arrested for raping a bunch of boys when he helped out at the El Pueblo Boy and Girl Ranch. Okay, so, you know, and then we see things like Boys and Girls Clubs and CPS and
Penn State,
you know,
Penn State, Jerry guy from Penn State, and that whole, I heard that was a whole network, that whole school thing. This guy Jerry Sandusky is the word I'm looking of. That whole thing I heard was that was part of a giant trafficking ring. I mean, it's everywhere. It's just everywhere, and that's one of the things, ladies, that I cannot believe as I continue to research this, is how widespread it is. I mean, you know, I hate to, but I start looking at, well, people, and you wonder, I mean, geez, it seems like 1 out of every 5 people or something is involved in this craziness. Candace, what's your thoughts, if you can, on QAnon? And, you know, of course, the thing that we've been waiting for, people have been following Q for a long time, like I believe we all have. Of course, we'd like to see some criminals arrested. I mean, I think that's, you know, kind of the mantra amongst the Q crowd. And I think we know that, you know, it all takes time, but are we going to see, Candace, in your view, I know you're a follower of Q, are we going to see mass arrests, do you think all at one time? Are we going to see, do they have the manpower to swoop down? And I mean, we're talking how many subpoenas are sealed indictments?
82,000.
See, it's hard to arrest 82,000 people at once. So I'm sure they're not all for that. But go ahead.
Well, that's true. You know, I mean, the thing is that we actually, as Laura knows, we don't see everything that's going on. And as we haven't in the dark side, we actually don't see it on the light side either. A lot of this is happening, right under our noses. And then, you know, we do have a lot of spotters all over the world, the Q Army, social network, social media. I mean, we are starting to look like the high ground. And it's quite heartening, actually, to be a part of this and to be given these, you know, little slips and this information. The John of God was, for me, a turning point, because I actually have been in this for over 25 years. I'm trained in the martial arts and Shaolin Kung Fu, and I've been in security, and I have been at the top of the top in terms of all of these people, and worked in the film production business. So my knowledge base goes way back, and I truly knew that this was what was going to happen when we got to the point where we had confirmation. And I think that Q stands as confirmation, and as I say, in my life, it's, you know, I may not be telling you something you don't already know, but I am confirming that it exists so that you, therefore, can understand this in a more profound way, become it, and then stand strong against it. It's a process, and I think talking with Laura is one of the most insightful moments that somebody can have, because that's exactly where she comes from, and what she's been doing for many years is empowering women to come into their light and to say, no more. And that's what we're doing right now.
You know, Laura, I would, and you may call yourself in the media, but the new media, okay, part of the new media, part of the new wave of people that are bringing information out to to the masses. You talked a little bit earlier about influence, about control. Haven't they not masterfully used the mainstream media for decades and decades and decades now to manipulate and control the narrative? I mean, that is a key phrase you used earlier, Laura, is control the narrative. I think the reason that you're seeing somewhat of a downfall of the black hats or the bad guys is because they no longer control the narrative. How valuable of an asset do you think that is for a side like ours, the Patriots, let's say, to control the narrative? I mean, that's monumental, is it not?
Oh, to have this shift in this media control and the fake news and all that kind of stuff.
Correct.
They're all owned by. Yeah, I mean, they're all owned, and so they decide what to share, what not to share, and when they're supposed to be neutral and just share news stories, they put opinions on it, they put adjectives on it, they try and control the way people think about it. And all these people that are, an upright, I can't even say the word Trump without having just an unbelievable debate and struggle and conflict. And I mean, and so I have to be, very careful of how I word things, because I choose to not give my power away. I want to take a stand and do what I can in my own personal life when it comes to what's happening in the world. But if people aren't starting to see the indications of massive change happening, the amount of times that Trump has called out fake news, that we all know it must be at this certain stage in the game, and that he set up a policy to make sure that, that would come to an end as we see this sort of changing of the guards. There was a lot of talk about having temporary martial law in order to be able to complete what needs to be done, so it's not so much out in the open. And there's a lot that's coming to head, around March 20th, as far as these Q drops go, that we, might all want to be prepared for. And then I think, when it all reemerges, after there might have to be some controls put in place just to keep everything from going berserk, we'll find that there's genuineness and we have the return of, honesty in the media. And when we look at YouTube and all the censoring, that every time they try and stop something, they draw way more attention to the very thing they're trying to stop. So the people, the numbers and the numbers of supporters of this are growing and growing every day. I mean, a lot of these videos have millions of hits, the ones that you hope people are seeing, and that's a really positive thing.
Indeed it is. Indeed it is. Candace, if you can, tell us a little bit here. We've got just over about 12 minutes left here in the show. Of course, we've kind of went through with no commercials, as you can tell, which is just fine. That's great. There's a lot of good things to talk about. The last segment, what would be the last segment, I'd like to talk about solutions, if I could. But excuse me, Candace, if you can, you don't have to name any names, but just to sort of reinforce what you've been saying. Once again, please let the listening audience know this is not conjecture. What you're speaking about, you have actually spoken to real live people that are victims of these heinous crimes. How can you say it? Crimes. So if you can a little bit, Candace, talk a little bit about the people that you've met. As I said, you don't want to put anybody in any harm's way, but if you can talk about the people that you've met and what they told you is actually going on between reservations here in Montana and other places.
Well, what I always return to is the first interview that I had, which was about a woman that had been dumped here. Actually, she was dumped down in Mexico, and that her life had been north of Seattle, and she had been used in the breeder program. And this is something that, it may be the case that she was complacent in it and was doing it thinking that she was a part of a, some sort of a cult or a cooperative. But when she was taken, when her children were taken away from her, she has not seen them for years. And then that she now has grandchildren that she spoke of that she had never met, and that she then was taken and left for dead, and she had to go to the Mexican consulate and get a passport, and she was brought back to the reservation here. And she has stated that she's not the only one that she knows of that this has happened. This is very different than just, women being taken for the sex trade program. So, but there is a lot of folks that I've talked to that this is happening on every reservation, really, including, South Dakota, North Dakota. And now I've also got confirmation of the trafficking happening in Utah. Now this is all, in a situation where you're finding these facts out and you're showing people pictures. There's a group of people that are very much aligned with, again, you say the black hats or the dark forces is what I have called them, but they are capable of moving these, primarily children, but it's also some adults, some women that are of the age of 18, and they are taking them and putting them into these homes, and then basically they mind control them. They are not allowed to go outside without somebody with them. There's also an incident of some terrorist camps that have been set up and are actually functioning on some of the tribal lands, although I haven't found any direct association to Montana. So this land is of critical importance to someone. And they are using it and using the people like with free will. This is not the people going down the road and just deciding to pick up somebody, and put them in their car and take them out for a joyride. This is an organized group that has been functioning for quite a while. I believe that I understand from this particular case was, much the province of a group of people that have really aren't even completely human. And this is a program that probably Laura knows something about, which is the Skinwalkers and the people that are part AI. And I just wonder if she's run into that with her research, because
we might have to do that for another show, Candace, because I did read the Skinwalker book, fantastic book. But we only got about 7 minutes left. I wanted to talk about solutions if we can. I'd like to end the show always with solutions. Can we go to you first, Laura? Can we talk about what can people do? I mean, it's probably in your town. I hate to say that. If it's not in your town, it's probably in a town pretty close to where you're living. What can the average person listening to this broadcast do to make a difference, to start to making a dent in this ubiquitous trafficking thing we have going on? It seems like everywhere.
I think exposure is key, because everything is worked and operated with, secrecy or cover-ups or things that we see on the surface that distract us away from what's really going on, to keep us sort of in this outer kind of argument and struggle that has nothing to do with, tending to the priorities. So the more information that's spread, the better. Be a messenger, and if you feel vulnerable, don't push yourself to do anything, but just work on, personal empowerment. I do a lot of talks about the potential of our DNA, upgrading our DNA, how that connects with the earth grids, the multidimensional nature of who we really are and what we're capable of, and this ascension window period, what it means, what it truly means. And this is the purging that needs to take place before we can really start to advance ourselves as a human race. There's a lot of traps out there that are going to keep diverting us in maybe even artificial timelines, because that's what they're trying to construct, and that's what they are harvesting energy for. When we look at things like adrenochrome, which Candace brought up in your previous show, that, obviously we don't have time to get into everything, but, empowerment is important, and being a messenger. And however you do it, it can be anonymously too. Look at the success of the Q drops. I mean, you can drop information locally in your communities, and if you feel like you don't want your name involved, at least you're dropping information. And the thing is, it'll start to catch on, because the thing is, once it's in a person's head, then they start to notice it on the internet. Then they start to see this larger dialogue going on, and it plants seeds. It might not happen for some people overnight to really get it and not have some sort of reaction to it, but we all have to be messengers, but really do the inner work and really relieve ourselves of these programmings and where the controlled narrative has impacted us and taken our vibration down. So as we seek justice and putting the criminals where they belong, we have to also balance that out with taking really good care of ourselves and really looking forward to a beautiful future and really coming together as a unified species like we're supposed to.
You know, I don't want to sound I don't want to sound anyway, but I'm going to say it. The TVs, I think I've called for a long time, people should probably turn off their television. I mean, not 1,000%, but you should not watch TV very much, because I think tests have been shown that they utilize the flicker rates on television to influence people's behavior. Do they not? I mean, there's been plenty of research on that, yes?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm so used to not having a TV that I almost forget how important that is. I mean, look at the commercials, look at the mind control, look at the pharmaceutical companies that, I mean, the amount of symptoms to just trying to solve one thing is just unbelievable. And the propaganda, and the thing is, we have to keep our creative channels clear. We have to allow it to operate from our own divine instructions and the beauty of this earth and spirit energy, and really unplug from this, because once we unplug from it, we've actually stepped off a very harmful timeline, because it's trying to lead us astray. And so it's very, very important that, you seek out alternative information, the people that really have hearts and integrity that are out there that are doing the research. You know, we have to, I look at it like divorcing the imposter, and we have to embrace the trueness, the truth, and look to each other for support and not expect something out there to do it, but also see the positivity that's beginning to emerge from something that's almost taken us all down, and it's not going to happen. So it's important to stay positive, but also diligent.
Candace, how would you recommend the people that you are close with there on the reservations? I know that it's sort of a closed culture, and I know it's very difficult for people that speak out. They can get, well, I know some people that have spoken out against the water compact have had their children taken from them there, on the reservations. What can people on the reservations do? I mean, they have to be slick about it. I hate to say, because like I said, they'll come down hard on them if they're not. What say you?
Well, I think that what I mentioned, there is a work group that's been set up here for missing and murdered Indigenous women. They have a website, and these are community action groups that are really, bringing in some good people. They're bringing in law enforcement. They're getting involved, having meetings, having potlucks, and just talking about it and sharing stories and allowing this to bring them together as the tribe and to basically be able to talk one-on-one, because so much of this, we have been trained for years and years and years to absorb everything in a second-hand manner, to look at the television for information, when really it's the community that is our strength. It is the community where I go down to the community meetings and work with Montana Co-op, and these are the ideals that are going to bring us back to a situation of integrity, of proper alignment, so that we are ready for this occurrence that Laura talked about, that I feel very profoundly we're being prepared for.
Well, we certainly are going to have a lot of information dropping here, I think, pretty soon, that's going to change the landscape of the world forever. No doubt about it. So, ladies, we have about a minute left. I want to thank you both for being here on the broadcast today. Before we go, I want to give, Candace, you'll be back on the broadcast again, I'm sure, as we have updates, of course. But, Laura, I want you to take some time, if you can, to give out your websites and where people can find out more about your work.
Yeah, my website, cosmicgaia.org, and you can find me on social media like Twitter and Facebook under Laura Eisenhower.
Okay, great. Well, again, I appreciate both of you being here. If you want to know more about what I've got going on, you can go to northwestlibertynews.com. That's northwestlibertynews.com. or if you want to support the broadcast and get some storable food and water filters and things, you can go to patriotprepared.com. And also, I just want to remind you, I didn't get a chance to say it during the interview, we still have the contest going for the rest next week, giving away 5 free water bottles. Just go to patriotprepared.com and put in your email address for the newsletter, and you're entered in the contest. So we're at the end of the show. For my guest, Laura and Candace, this is James White saying bye now.
Northwest Liberty News.